This demo shows the TeqVAS Value Added Solution for Fabless Semiconductor Supply Chain from TeqTron. Economic conditions like globalization and linked economies around the world are tough and complex. Companies are forced to do more with less to maintain profitability. Cost-effective manufacturing data management solutions allow companies to achieve seamless operational advantage using standard web protocols and document languages to significantly reduce the cost of doing business. SOA has emerged as the premier enterprise integration and architecture framework in today's complex and heterogeneous computing environment. Web services are implemented using technologies such as XML, WSDL, and SOAP. With the proliferation of cloud applications and emergence of SaaS platform and infrastructure, SOA will continue to be among the top choices for enterprise application integration. TeqTron Value Added Solutions is built on a unified BPL, SOA, PL/SQL architecture. While the focus of this demonstration is the fabless semiconductor business, this seamless solution is flexible enough to cover many industry verticals. One crucial problem facing fabless semiconductor supply chain management is a highly transaction-intensive environment with large numbers of supplier real-time lot processing transactions, where accurate and timely data is required to support an integrated manufacturing planning system. A manual data entry solution is hard-pressed to keep up with the number of transaction validations and entries, resulting in an out-of-sync and low-quality data in ERP. A custom automated solution could have a high total cost of ownership to maintain and manage new vendor onboarding. TeqVAS features a scalable real-time integration solution built on a BPL, SOA, PL/SQL architecture that enables the vendor onboarding process to be greatly simplified. The transaction validation engine performs a complete validation before updating ERP so that any problems with vendor manufacturing data are found and resolved before reaching the ERP system using the exception management tools and processes. This means that data issues can be resolved with minimal IT intervention. The following demo shows some of the TeqVAS UI features and functionality for the supplier integration connector for the semiconductor industry. The TeqVAS supply chain dashboard helps companies maintain supplier data from fabless semiconductor vendors and Oracle ERP up to date by automating and validating supplier data entry, helping users resolve data problems, and providing a complete history of material movement. The homepage shows the status of vendor connections by showing any problems that require resolution, as well as the total number and status of vendor connections. The Vendor Process tab shows a more detailed list of vendor data connections. Each connection processes files sent by the vendor which usually contain multiple lot events like new lot, lot split, lot merge, and more. For each vendor connection, you can see if there are any files that have been sent from the vendor but have not yet been processed. When in auto mode, each file is individually processed in 1-minute intervals. A vendor connection can also be set to manual mode, where the files will be processed one at a time in sequence when a user clicks the Process Next button. Clicking the History button shows a list of all the files that have been processed by any one vendor. Once a vendor file has been processed and imported into TeqVAS supply chain, it is given a unique control ID for tracking. Here you can see the date that the lot was processed, the process sequence number, the incoming file data type, the status of the process, and the original file name. This list can be filtered to show the vendor processes for any vendor. To see a list of events contained in the vendor file, click on the File Name link. After processing the vendor file and importing into TeqVAS, each event is validated against other lot events and Oracle ERP. This list shows all of the events sent in one vendor file Each event is identified by a common control ID and a unique event ID for history tracking. The timestamp for each event is from the original file. The class and type of event show the lot change. The date time created field shows when the event was added to the TeqVAS system, and the processed field shows when the event was fully validated. The status field shows the real-time validation status of the event. The manual field shows whether the event was manually processed, and the ignored field shows if the event was either manually or automatically ignored based on business rules. The Vendor Settings tab shows the vendor detail information, such as vendor full name, ID, data file type, and organization. This tab also shows vendor operation to internal operation mapping and allows a user to add, edit, or remove an operation type. Transactions are generated from most events to update the ERP system. This tab shows the transactions which have been created and the current process status. The transaction list shows transaction ID, the vendor name, class and type of event, the lot number that was affected, the created date, the current status, the date the transaction was processed, and group of transactions that were processed at the same time. You will also see if the individual transaction was ignored, if it was processed manually, and any other transaction that it is dependent on. To find a specific transaction, use the filters for vendor name, processed date range, and event type. Use the search field for more detail, for example, to find all transactions for a specific lot number. To open a specific transaction detail page, click the ID link. The System Exception tab shows the date, time, and description of the exception, and a link to retest to see if the problem still exists. System exceptions generally stem from problems with the ERP instance or network. Any problems with a file being processed before the events are validated are reported in the Process Exceptions tab. The user can view any exceptions and then take action on them here. For duplicate or out-of-sequence files, the options are to allow or skip. For failed transactions, the options are to retry, replace, or skip. The TeqVAS validation engine keeps ERP data clean by validating and managing lot sequence dependencies and non-failure exceptions against incoming vendor and ERP data. If there are any problems found when validating any event within a process, the user can open the Event Exceptions tab, find the exception, and drill down to the details, and choose how to continue, choosing from 4 options: to ignore, to perform a manual operation, to resubmit the event, or to override. If there are any problems sending any updates to Oracle ERP, they will be shown in the Transaction Exception tab. TeqTron's TeqVAS semiconductor supply chain solution is built on TeqTron's deep domain expertise in Oracle ERP, SOA, and semiconductor supply chain. The result is a flexible integrated tool which will lower operating costs by increasing end-to-end visibility and data quality in your vendor supply chain.